Welcome to Revolutionary Optimism. Living at this time in history, we are challenged with a convergence of crises that is affecting our daily lives. Issues like economic hardship, a teetering democracy, and the worsening climate emergency have left many Americans feeling more despair than ever. To respond to the challenging times we're living through, physician, humanitarian, and social justice advocate Dr. Paul Zeitz has identified revolutionary optimism as a new cure for hopelessness, despair, and cynicism. Revolutionary optimism is itself an infectious, contagious, self-created way of thinking and living, where you connect with others on the path of love. Once you commit yourself as a revolutionary optimist, you can bravely unleash your personal power, #unify with others, and accelerate action for our collective repair, justice, and peace. On this podcast, Dr. Zeitz is working to provide you with perspectives from leaders fighting for equity, justice, and peace on their strategies, insights, and tools for overcoming adversity and driving forward bold and transformative solutions with unbridled revolutionary optimism and real-world pragmatism. In this episode, Dr. Zeitz is talking with two distinguished guests, Dr. Margaret Klein Salamon and Rabbi Waskow, about the psychological, physical, and political impacts of the climate emergency in the face of a teetering democracy. First, Dr. Margaret Klein Salamon is a world-renowned climate psychologist, founder of the Climate Mobilization, and the executive director of the Climate Emergency Fund, which funds groups like Climate Defiance and many others. She is also the author of Facing the Climate Emergency: How to Transform Yourself with Climate Truth. Salamon helps lead national and global efforts to ignite direct action and hold policymakers accountable for World War II-scale mobilization to address the climate emergency.
Welcome, Margaret. Thanks for joining the podcast today. I'm truly honored to be with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Congratulations on the second edition of your fantastic book, Facing the Climate Emergency: How to Transform Yourself with Climate Truth. I love this book and strongly recommend that all my listeners go and read it. I'm actually going to start at the conclusion and focus on that right now, because you are saying in the conclusion, all in for all life. So that is an invitation in my mind to invite everyone into this effort. And actually, is that your idea? What is your idea about all in for all life? Can you explain that?
The climate emergency is epic in scale. It threatens all of us, all humanity, but also all the animals on this planet and the plants and the just amazing ecosystems on this beautiful planet. We are all at risk here, like in tremendous danger. And so the invitation to go all in, it is to act like this emergency is an emergency, to realize that your future has been stolen from you, and to join into climate activism. And I believe the most effective way to do that is through nonviolent civil disobedience. And that's, to me, that's the best way to go all in for all life. And that doesn't mean that you have to get in the streets and get arrested, right? For example, I myself personally, I have not been arrested. I work in a different capacity in the movement on the fundraising side, and at Climate Emergency Fund, making grants to activists. So, which is, important in its own right. And also the book, whatever. But so those are my ways of contributing. But everyone has something to give, something to, it can be, monthly donation. It can be cooking for activists. It can be doing childcare for activists, or helping them with their books, their accounting. What do you have to offer? How can you go all in for all life and transform yourself in response to this moment?
Beautiful. I love that. And I really support your efforts in that. I do agree with you that nonviolent, peaceful mobilization, peaceful protest is essential right now, because, as you say, policymakers and business leaders and many folks in society are not understanding the magnitude of the climate emergency. And so getting media attention and waking people up is really important. as you know. I sometimes, when I get into the reality of what's happening, for example, we're hitting 1.5 degrees of warming Celsius this year. And experts had said it wasn't going to happen till like the 2040s or 2050. We're going to get to 2 degrees of Celsius of warming way before 2050. And we don't know, as you said, whether humans or other animals or plants can survive warming of the planet, hothouse Earth, as they say, at that level of degree. So I really feel like we're living at this auspicious moment in human history. And I want to ask you, do you agree? Is this an auspicious moment? It's either we take bold transformational action right now and focus on repair, or we are going to go down a path of destruction.
Absolutely, that is the choice. That is the choice. Recognize the emergency and just do everything we can. Just totally reorient our government and our institutions and how we and money and how the government spends towards saving as much life as possible. In some ways it's like, oh, that's a wacky political theory, but in some ways it's like, are you kidding? Of course we should do this. It's the only possible rational thing to do. But, our systems are just stuck. They're in the inertia of normalcy.
Well, I want to follow up on that. I think you said that we're stuck in the paralysis of normalcy. Can you tell us the history of the climate mobilization and the effort that you led to declare a climate emergency politically by governments and by society, by other stakeholders? Where are we with all that? How many cities, how many states, how many countries, how many corporations have said that this is a climate emergency that you agree, that based on your definition of that?
2,336 jurisdictions and local governments. So from the national and international, the EU declared a climate emergency down to cities. And those declarations cover over 1 billion people. 1 billion people live in a geography, whether local or national or international, that has declared, or state level, that has declared a climate emergency. So what we did at Climate Mobilization is like conceptualize that campaign and get it started. First in an nonprofit organization declared a climate emergency, then a city government did, then another city government, then we did about 10 of them, mainly in the Bay Area. But the first declaration was Hoboken, and then also Montgomery County here in Washington, D.C. So here on the East Coast, that we were doing some as well. And then when Extinction Rebellion came along, and we shared this tactic with them. We said that, this is something, because the thing is, activists need wins, right? Like, to build power as a movement, you need to have some kind of return on your efforts. And so declaring a climate emergency, we thought, was a good way to set the record straight, to just say the truth from the official body, and that we need a World War II scale or massive scale mobilization. That should be the response, an overriding national and international priority. And just to, for some revolutionary optimism, there's movies about, and billionaires want to terraform Mars, right? Go to Mars and make it habitable. And that is probably not going to happen, but it's a vision. It's a vision for human potential, right? We can do that here.
Let's terraform Earth.
Yeah, we can intervene in these processes. We do not have to be just passive idiots, just waiting for it to totally overwhelm us. We can do something here. And so anyway, the climate emergency declarations tried to get that on record. And it was, successful in some ways. In 2019, climate emergency was word of the year because usage of it had gone up 10,000%, right? It was like a new It's like a intervention into the lexicon,
a culture shift.
Yeah, culture
can I
shift.
just
There you
take
go.
a moment, Margaret?
Sure.
I want you to really receive this. So if you can put on your receptivity.
Okay.
Thank you for your pioneering leadership and all the people that you worked with in the climate mobilization, Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement, and many others at the local level around the world. You said it in a passing statement. Oh, well, the EU did it. The EU is 27 major governments, major economies. It's huge. This was a huge step forward in our global quest to respond to the climate emergency by calling it what it is, as you say. So I just want you to really receive the kudos that and my personal appreciation, and I know all of my listeners and millions of people who you'll never meet appreciate the leadership that you're taking. So thank you.
Oh, that's very kind. It was a very exciting organization and campaign. And we also, at the Climate Mobilization, I'm very proud of a document that we produced called the Victory Plan, which is a 100-page document written by Ezra Silk and supported by me. He lays out what World War II scale climate mobilization could actually look like on a policy level, because it's a metaphor that people use, but to actually try to think that through. So anyway, I think that was a major contribution as well.
So it's 5 years, like that was like that work, like you were the word of the year in 2019. It's 4 years later. And the way I am observing it, I feel like humanity in general and Americans in specific are acting like a herd of buffalo stampeding off the cliff into their almost probable certain extinction as a species. So while it was a great step forward, we're still not there yet. And I just want for my listeners' sake, I want to ask you, has the United States federal government, the president or the Congress, declared a global climate emergency?
No, there's no climate emergency declared at the national level or international level that the United States is involved in. But there is an activist group in Washington, D.C. called Declare Emergency that is taking disruptive action, campaigning for exactly that.
I want to meet those folks. Thank you. I didn't know that. So I understand that, as you know, we're entering a political election cycle coming up to the 2024 election. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you know of any presidential candidates that have expressed publicly their willingness to commit to declaring a climate emergency using the powers of the presidency, which is what I think you need personally to do what you're wanting to, what the Victory Plan calls for. So do you know of any?
So I believe Marianne Williamson has said that she would support declaring a climate emergency, and Cornel West, I am not sure.
Okay, so we need to check on that. But yes, actually, Marianne Williamson was on an earlier episode of the Revolutionary Optimism Podcast, and I asked her directly if she was president, would she declare a climate emergency? And she responded by saying that at first she would reach out to the private sector and offer them pathways of engagement, like what FDR did in World War II. And if they don't agree, then she would go ahead and issue a legal climate emergency declaration. So what I wanted to ask you, if you were president, Margaret Klein, Salamon, and you had the power to sign an executive order declaring a climate emergency, what would you have the U.S. federal government do? And do we have a draft EO? They're called, we call them executive orders. And as activists, we write them sometimes and like try to get them taken. So is there a draft EO for a climate emergency? And what would you do if you were president?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that my ambition is not to be president, but I would like to be like the therapist general or something, like top national therapist. That would be my ambition. But because I think, we're really crazy right now. And
it's like a surgeon general, but
exactly.
But you want to be the top, you want to be like the top climate therapist. I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my ultimate ambition. But if I was president, I would declare a climate emergency. I would ban the expansion of the fossil fuel infrastructure. It is truly insane that we are continuing to build out pipelines and new fossil fuel facilities. I mean,
aren't we subsidizing fossil fuel industries with the federal government?
They're the most profitable industry in history. It's just, like I said, I mean, it's on this epic scale of good and evil. Yeah, and then, I mean, we need, it's very hard to answer the question, what should we do? Because there's so much to do. Just, I mean, we have to transform our energy system and our agricultural system, and we need to rewild, and we need to just like figure out how to keep our agriculture going and have enough food for the world. And we need to, like terraform Earth and just try everything that we can. So, and that's kind of the idea of a climate emergency and all in for all life, right? Is just, I mean, that the government, I mean, it's like, again, this sounds both radical and common sense, but the government should spend without limit to save as much life as possible, right? Yeah. It shouldn't be about like balancing the needs of the corporations or whatever. This is the priority. This is it. So, yeah, but just as chief national therapist general, I would just want to counsel the president and the team about like, how can we go bigger? How can we go more ambitious? How can we do it faster, right? And just get everyone to get into that mindset of incrementalism as just a road to disaster. So
thank you for that. And I hope you will serve in that role someday. I think you would be great at it. And I think our country and our world certainly needs that. I think it's a brilliant idea. So I also, in your book on page 58 and 59, you talk about climate doomers, the people that are hopeless. And I sometimes think that I might be a climate doomer in disguise as a revolutionary optimist. Because as I, really understand what's going on, I sometimes do get despairing and hopeless and want to just like roll my head under the covers and never come out. And but I think based on your definition of a climate doomer, I don't think I am that, because they say, forget it, it's over, just grieve and prepare for the end of days. And I'm not willing to go there. So I am a revolutionary optimist. But I wanted to ask you, do you ever have days where you personally, this is a personal question for you, do you ever like not want to get out of bed, you want to give up, you want to just go out on a kayak on a river and say whatever? And if that ever happens, what do you do to get yourself out of that and back on the saddle of, mobilizing humanity to implement a response to this crisis?
Right. So this is an example of how working on oneself can impact how much one is able to contribute to the larger mission. And I am pretty good at turning my terror, which is so intense, into activism and into work. One might describe me as a workaholic. That's how I deal with it. When I took a week off between Christmas and New Year's, I was at this lake, and the lake just froze over and then melted and then froze again during these crazy temperature swings. And I really do feel a kind of pressing fear that drives urgency that I then pour into the work. And that, which is, everyone's different. But I think that the basic model that I'm talking about of being freaked out, being a doomer, because holy shit, the situation is terrifying. If you are honest, if you are rational, if you are living in truth, you look at that and you say, oh my God. So, but then what happens after that, right? What do you do with that? And my recommendation in the book is to welcome it and process it and not try to fight it. Feel that grief, like cry about what's happening. Grieve the future that you thought you had, the goals that you wanted to do that climate emergency is going to rob from you. And feel that terror and feel it at all. There's so many, it's like the full range of human emotions one can have to the climate emergency and process them and talk about them. And then take all of that energy, huge amount of energy, and direct it towards effective climate activism. I think that's the way. I think that's the prescription for living in this nightmare that we live in.
I love that. And since revolutionary optimism is a contagious, infectious choice about how to live, I think we'll weave that into its definition. So, as a climate activist and a revolutionary optimist, how do you recommend folks relate to other people or other institutions that are resisting the wake-up call or are resisting or opposing the kind of response that you're talking about? So I think one of the things that I'm exploring for myself personally is instead of ignoring or fighting the opposers, how can I embrace them and from a place of love and bring them with us on this journey? Because I think it's an all hands on deck imperative and opportunity, and we can't do it with half of us. We need all of us to. And all the people with power and influence, especially, to join the quest to save the possibility of human generations.
So, thank you. Yeah, I think the answer is nonviolent civil disobedience. And if you think about Martin Luther King, for example, and the civil rights movement, their actions were not hateful, right? That's the point. Nonviolent civil disobedience, peaceful civil resistance, in which the activists embody the spirit of righteousness, that they demonstrate through their actions how seriously they take their cause and what they're willing to endure because the cause is so great. So yeah, they need to, when someone is ready to switch from being an oil executive to going all in for the movement, which includes donating large amounts of money, when someone's ready to switch, okay, everyone does have a place in the movement, but as long as an institution is perpetuating the status quo through normalcy, then absolutely they deserve to be a target of protest.
Yeah. So thank you, Margaret. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for this fantastic book, Facing the Climate Emergency, How to Transform Yourself with Climate Truth. And we look forward to staying in touch and having you back on the show during 2024.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How did you feel reading the book? What was your emotional experience?
It was helpful for me because I especially liked the pathway that you created in the book. The 5 steps, basically, is how I saw it. Yeah, 5 steps. Step 1, facing climate truth. Step 2, welcoming fear, grief, and other painful feelings. I've definitely done step 1. I do step 2 like kind of every 3 hours.
Yes.
I've reimagined my life story. I was telling Marianne Williamson I have a 1-year-old granddaughter, Bertie Lou, whose birthday is actually today. And a year ago when she was born, I kind of did the math and thought she's going to be 80 in 2100. And it kind of really unleashed me even further into like, we have to take action now. So that is how I'm seeing my life through my grandchildren. Entering emergency mode. I'm with you. I'm there 1,000%. I'd love to work on a draft executive order that we can pressure the next president to implement. That's how I would operationalize it. Or I would get arrested. I have been arrested and we'll do it again.
Nice.
Join the movement and disrupt normalcy. This is an interesting question because my family, we have climate activists and we talk about not carbon shaming anyone. Like if you eat a piece of meat or if you eat a fish, we're not going to shame you. If you get on an airplane or you drive a petro car, we've kind of eradicated carbon shaming, we call it, in our family. On the one hand, on the other hand, we have to change the way we do business at every level,
I think the focus should be on being an activist. So I mean, I don't think shame is necessarily the right approach, but the encouragement should be, get involved in the climate emergency movement. I think an activist that's doing that and then, eats a burger is helping much more than someone who, is trying to focus on their lifestyle over politics.
Point taken. Yeah, exactly. So I see your 5 steps as like a living cycle, It's a journey. It's not step 1 linear and you're one and done, go through the 5 steps and you're done. This is an ongoing cycle of exploration internally and externally. And I always say, what can I do as an activist today? How can I serve today? So I think that's an ongoing quest of mine to figure that out because I'm where you're at, and I thank you for your leadership and for helping bring me along to where we need to be. So I appreciate your personal mentorship, and your vision kind of woke me up. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Paul. That to me is the most meaningful thing a person can say.
Now, Dr. Zeitz is talking with Rabbi Arthur Waskow, scholar, activist, and founder of the Shalom Center, an organization that works to promote interfaith dialogues and responses to the climate emergency. He also has a PhD in American history, and he is currently working on proposals for broad-based social mobilization and a new U.S. Constitution. His spiritual work embodies heart-centered leadership, and his emphasis on interfaith responses demonstrates the ability and necessity for a collective effort among racial, religious, and political groups to effectively confront the climate crisis in our democracy.
Welcome, Rabbi Arthur. It's a great honor to have you here on the Revolutionary Optimism Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Just naming it Revolutionary Optimism was enough to bring me there.
I wanted to ask you to share your wisdom and your thoughts with our listeners regarding the auspicious moment that we're living through right now in both U.S. history and globally in the context of the global climate emergency. I know many people know you as a rabbi and a leader in the ecological and environmental movement, and you're also a PhD in American history. I don't think most people know that. So I wanted you to kind of weave together your wisdom from both of those parts of yourself and share what you think is possible now.
Well, the first thing is that it occurs to me, you said it's an auspicious moment. The word auspices from Latin originally meant they would sacrifice an animal and check the intestines. Then from that, they would get some vision of the future. So I think you're probably right that it's a moment in which our guts we're in danger of being sacrificed by our own corporate leaders in the climate crisis, by some of our own political leaders, and what you might call the democracy crisis. It's funny that you mentioned the two origins that I have, the rabbi origin and the PhD origin, because I've been feeling myself tugged in the last year by wanting to deal with the PhD origin even more. And I've spent the last 45 years dealing with what comes from the deep spiritual teachings of a living Torah, which can change and does change, and we have changed in our own generation. So both of those elements, I keep asking myself the question, the spiritual teachings of all spiritual traditions teach that love is more important than greed. All human beings have some element of greed, protective, self-advancing, and most human beings have some element of loving neighbors. Sometimes they define neighbors in a very narrow way, but people do look at the earth and fall in love with a tree, with a flower, and that's a very broad kind of love. So how do you write love into a constitution? Somebody, I can't remember who, said that justice is love in public. And I think that's true. And justice means that you take seriously the value of each person who is in your community, and each person and each living being, and elements that we don't even think are alive, like a river, like a mountain, but are crucial to life in the planet. And that loving those beings and treating them justly, treating them with respect, not tormenting them, not subjugating them, turns out to be just as important as not subjugating or tormenting other human beings. So I've been spending time this last year or so, at least on the one hand, maybe it's 3 hands or 4 hands, trying to imagine what a loving constitution for the United States might be, and how do American Jews respond to the upheaval in Israel? And can we learn from each other? There have been upheavals here, nothing as big in proportion. I mean, if you had 10% of Israelis, 10% of the whole country have been in the streets or doing other kinds of civil disobedience against what's essentially a racist and fascist government. If there were 10% of Americans in the streets or doing other kinds of civil disobedience, that would be 33 million people. Our biggest demonstrations during the Trump administration, our biggest demonstrations against what was a kind of clumsy neo-fascist government was about 2.5 or 3 million. Just 1% of the country, not 10% of the country. Now, one of the things I said we could learn from the Israeli experience is it's a small country. It's much easier to get together 10% of the country if the country is small, not if the country is big like this, but small like this. And maybe we should be learning that very effective anti-fascist action could be centered around crucial small pieces of the U.S., the Bay Area in California, New York metropolitan area, the Boston metropolitan area, Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, that it might be valuable for us to think about what it means to do that. And people now are, in terms of the Supreme Court's attempt to subjugate women, are now organizing in states that people thought were heavily Republican states, and they're winning majorities, and they're acting in the states, not only in the United States at large, but in a given state that's supposed to be Republican, but are winning majorities.
Let me ask you one last clarifying question. As a historian and a spiritual leader, you have said that you were spending a lot of the last year thinking about and crafting your ideas about a new constitution for the United States. What brought you to that insight that that was a possibility? And do you think this is the time when that kind of transformation is possible in the United States?
It should be. It needs to be. It has happened before. In fact, the first Constitution of the United States was called the Articles of Confederation. And when an important group of Americans decided that that government was too weak to protect them, they got together in Philadelphia and they just ignored it. There was a provision in the Articles about how to amend the Articles. They didn't bother. They invented a new way and they adopted it. And that's the one we call the Constitution. But there have been major changes. The Bill of Rights was an attempt to say, okay, you need a stronger central government. Well, there need to be limits on the stronger central government. That's why the Bill of Rights. Then in the post-Civil War period, the Reconstruction period, the country realized there had been deep political changes and the old Constitution wasn't enough. So they adopted 3 amendments that were really a new Constitution. And during the New Deal, not with changing the words of the Constitution, but changing the words of laws. So labor unions, which had been practically crushed before, were elevated. There were all kinds of changes that changed the real Constitution of the United States. It happened again in the 1960s, where the Black community, which presumably had been freed in 1865, but then jammed into not quite slavery, but very restricted and subjugated place, for a moment got equality and then were pushed back again. In the 60s, they weren't pushed back, but we've been living through a reactionary period of an attempt to undo, for sure, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, especially the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And my new draft Constitution begins with an article that wasn't even in the Constitution. Nobody could imagine why it would have to be. It's Article 1, Earth, and a whole set of provisions about how the United States needs to respond to the crisis of the Earth. Atomic bombs, H-bomb, CO2. I always keep remembering the end of T.S. Eliot's great poem, Wasteland. He writes, "This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper." Well, I think the H-bomb is a bang, and the CO2 is a whimper. And we have both of them sitting there ready to destroy the planet. And the whimper is doing more, in fact, than the bang to destroy the planet. Well, what is the relation? There must be any decent constitution. And we now have states that have adopted green amendments, they're called. And in fact, one of them in Montana, just this week, a judge ruled in a case where a bunch of youngsters from 5 to 19, I think, appealed that the government of Montana was destroying their right to a livable environment, and that was unconstitutional in Montana. And they won the first level of the court case. Now, God knows what will happen when they get to the Montana Supreme Court. But the court ruled that there was a law that has recently been passed by the Montana legislature that violates that constitutional provision. Well, there ought to be such a green amendment to the U.S. Constitution. There ought to be an amendment which creates a floor and a ceiling for income and wealth so that we don't have this insane, multi-billionaires on one hand and people who can't even afford food on the other hand. That's insane. There needs to be a constitution saying it's insane. Or the Senate and the presidency and the Supreme Court are all anti-democratic. They're not just undemocratic, they're anti-democratic. The Senate actually has a provision in the Constitution saying you cannot amend the equal votes of the states, big ones and little ones, that's the huge one. You can't amend that they have equal votes in the Senate. But you can do what the British did with the House of Lords, which is reduce the powers of the Senate, and that ought to be in the Constitution. A popular vote for president and a universal, there's nowhere in the Constitution. The Constitution as amended says you can't restrict the ballot on account of race. You can't restrict the ballot on account of sex. And you can't restrict the ballot on account of age for people over 18. But it never says anywhere every citizen of the United States has the right to vote, period. Don't come with rules. You got to produce your driver's license. You got to produce this and that and the other. No, every citizen of the United States has the right to vote in whatever jurisdiction they live in for all the governments, state, local, federal. And that, and what's more, in the Constitution I drafted, like Australia, every citizen not only has the right to vote, every citizen has the obligation to vote. It's a rule. And in Australia, you get fined if you don't vote. And there are ways, for instance, making voting day, election day, a holiday. So people who need to work can have the day off to vote. We don't do that. There's a built-in anti-democratic bias to the present Constitution. There was been a lot of excitement in the last week or so. Ohio, some people who wanted to prevent women from having the right to an abortion and maybe down the road the right to birth control. Ohio tried to restrict its referendum, so it would be very hard to amend its constitution, which says that there is a right to abortion, etc. And there was an outpouring of voters, the people who supported that amendment, thought, oh, it's midsummer, people are hot, people are bored, they're not going to pay attention. We can pass this amendment to make it very hard to amend the Constitution. Well, didn't work. And the referendum turned out to be very important. And next fall, there's going to be a vote on an amendment that would put the right to an abortion in the Montana Constitution, in the Ohio Constitution. Well, everybody got all excited about it. How about there being a national referendum? People of the United States would vote, to the polls show, would vote for a serious bill about the climate and a serious bill about people voting. But there's no provision for a national referendum. There needs to be.
Yeah.
And success of what happened in Ohio should be teaching us. So that's in there too. So that's the kind of thing I've been trying to do with the vision of, it's a spiritual vision in secular terms. Did I say this wonderful secular teaching? Justice is the face of love in public.
Right. That was Cornel West. So thank you for that wonderful vision that you shared, and for your leadership, and for your big-hearted commitment to moving humanity forward in responding to the climate emergency, and also to the what we call constitutional rot, or the democracy crisis that you described so eloquently. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. My deep love for you and respect, and have a great week ahead.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for Revolutionary Optimism.
Now it's time for my diagnostic review of Dr. Margaret Klein Salamon and Rabbi Arthur Waskow with respect to them as revolutionary optimists. Margaret is an amazing leader of the Climate Emergency Fund, and she's been working for a long time in mobilizing action by governments and by society to grapple with the mental health stress of the climate emergency, but also political action. She's in a place right now where she's focusing on direct action to hold policymakers and other leaders accountable for ending fossil fuels, for declaring a climate emergency, and for all the things that we need to do to respond to this pressing crisis. So she's an amazing leader and uses her activism as a way of overcoming any sense of despair or hopelessness that might creep into her mind. Then we spoke with Rabbi Arthur Waskow, who's a spiritual leader and a leader in the environmental movement. And what most people don't know is that he has a PhD in American history. Arthur has been working on the climate emergency and ecological disaster for decades now. And his current body of thinking is focusing on what do we need to do to update and transform our U.S. Constitution to ensure that there's a healthy, balanced relationship between people living in this country and our relationship with Earth. And he understands that we have a teetering democracy, and he proposes a wide range of reforms to overcome those challenges. So these two leaders, Margaret and Arthur, are a dynamic duo of revolutionary optimists that I hope you'll listen to and learn from today and in the years to come. Thank you, and have a great day.
Are you ready to be part of the revolution? To learn more about revolutionary optimism, please visit drpaulzeitz.org. To explore building movements, please visit unifymovements.org. If you like this show, be sure to follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Revolutionary Optimism, transforming the world, one episode at a time.